Hi, good morning. Welcome to church, wherever you are. I am in my backyard this morning for our worship service, and that is where this morning's sermon is coming from. Do you remember those Where's Waldo books? Page after page of cluttered, busy pictures designed to hide Waldo somewhere within the crowds on a beach or a busy park. Then you'd pore over them page by page, searching for this conspicuously dressed man with these glasses and the beanie and the red and white shirt. And you could almost always find him after a while because you knew what you were looking for. So I have a funny Where's Waldo story, and I promise this doesn't take us too far off track this morning. My sister had this camera when we were growing up, and it was maybe the worst camera ever made. I mean, it was very bizarre. And it automatically inserted Waldo into the frame of the photo, which is pretty funny anyway. And this is in the 90s, early 90s when we were kids. And so it's not like, today when, you can go onto Snapchat or Facebook and you can use a filter and all of a sudden you've got, a flower crown, or you've got like bling, or there's a cat next to you or something like that. It wasn't anything that like took into account what actually was in the picture and worked around that. This was like straight up a little slide that was inside the camera that placed it into the photograph you took. So it wasn't putting it really in the best place possible for concealment. So it's not like, Waldo would be somewhere back in this area, hidden maybe among my flowers here that are red and white, so you can't find him. No. Waldo was in the exact same corner of every single picture, and it invariably covered up some part of the photo, pretty much, waving hello and ready to ruin the photograph. Here's one of my sister, adorable in a little apron, but there's Waldo just kind of showing up, right? There's he's just right there. I can't believe I still have some of these pictures. There he is, ready to wave hello in the same corner and showing up right there on my grandpa. So anyway, I had to find those because I have been thinking about Waldo a lot this week, and not because I love searching for infuriating tiny little men that are tucked into pages that are swarming with people, especially not right now because none of them are minding proper social distance, okay? None of them. They're all smashed in there together. But I've been thinking about it because I've been chewing on this reading from Luke all week long, thinking about Jesus just kind of showing up on the road to Emmaus and what it must have been like for the apostles not to recognize who he was or realize he was there walking with them and talking to them and doing what he'd always done, which was interpreting the scriptures, right? What has to be happening for you to not recognize somebody that you have been close to for so long and you have put so much of your life into being with that person to the point where you could say that your life is at risk even. And so this isn't quite a Waldo situation. There's not really a template for it. It's not like there's a key at the bottom of the page that says, see if you can spot the risen Christ on this page. There's nothing there that says like what to expect after, the resurrection, there's nothing there. And it wasn't even like my sister's really horrible Where's Waldo camera that would just have Jesus show up in the same exact spot on like the bottom left-hand corner of every photo. Like he wasn't even just awkwardly present. Instead, he just kind of simply joined the two apostles as they were walking dejectedly to Emmaus. Now let's take a moment to get our bearings. This is the third Sunday of Easter. And last week we jumped ahead to 8 days after Easter with the story of doubting Thomas and all of the everything that happened that week, that first week after the resurrection, or maybe even all the things that didn't happen because they were all still kind of like holed up in that room and hadn't gone out into the world yet. But this one, actually, this story, chronologically, we're taking a couple of steps back and we're right there on the evening of that first Easter again. So keep that in mind, that things have just happened. This is that night of that first Easter. 2 of the apostles are making the trek to a village, Emmaus. The scripture that we read today tells us that's about 7 miles out of Jerusalem. So not a super short walk, but not a super long walk, a couple of hours maybe, depending on how fast you walk. I don't walk that fast, but so they've been making that trek. This whole walk was taking place after this emotionally charged few days. They had just witnessed the crucifixion of Jesus a few days earlier, just on Friday. And now we're at Sunday night, and they had kept the Sabbath that day in between. And so there's just this in between, it's been a strange terrain that they don't recognize emotionally even. And they had found out that morning that the women had found the empty tomb and had even had angelic visions and had seen him on the path. And the good news hadn't quite reached these 2, deep in here. Like it hadn't resonated with them yet. Though they'd heard the women's accounts of that morning, they were, women. Even followers of a radical guy like Jesus, whose table was open to everyone and ministry was always open and welcoming and inclusive of women. It may have been hard. They may have struggled, as not Jesus, to hear the accounts of the women in the same way that they would have if it had come from men. And so we also have to recognize that they're also deeply in the throes of this grief, this raw missing of their person, And there's even this part of the reading that says once Jesus joined them, it's pointed out that they just stood still looking sad. This is not a twosome who have really had any alleluias escape their lips yet. And it is in this state of grief mixed with a little bit of shame, maybe, because the things they had assumed would have happened already just hadn't. That Jesus, the risen Christ, finds them and inserts himself into their conversation, even though they're discussing the recent events, all revolving around Jesus. They don't recognize him. Or more importantly, they're kept from recognizing him. What could keep you from recognizing someone you love so dearly and so deeply? There are a few ways of reading such a fascinating choice of words. One could be that God is keeping them from seeing clearly to enhance that aha moment at the end when Jesus becomes clear to them. Another could be that through the lens of grief, we don't see anything as clearly as we would otherwise. And also, what our expectations are of a situation's outcome can affect the way we perceive what is happening around us. They were not expecting him to show himself while they were walking, and especially not while they were discussing their disappointment. We had hoped he was to be the one to redeem Israel. And here we are, and it's already the end of the 3rd day, and no big fireworks or showy return. We still feel the same as ever, just really sad. And when a few of us went to the tomb, hoping to flip that switch that signaled the angels to appear, just like it happened with the women, the tomb was empty, but nothing happened. It's been a big bummer of a weekend. There's another thing about those Where's Waldo books that seems to fit in here. When looking so intensely and intently for Waldo, I've noticed that I miss all the other bizarre, fascinating, and kind of humorous people that are in all of those other little vignettes and scenes happening in that crowded image. I've been looking so intently for a single expected result, and it clouds the way that I see everything else on the periphery. Squinting and searching so hard for a red and white shirt means I have missed the couple walking down the lane, or the child dropping her ice cream and a dog at her heels, super eager to catch it. We think we know exactly what the resurrection means, exactly what God's intent is, exactly what the signs are all pointing to. And when we do that, we tend to miss all the surprises that are lined up waiting for us to be taken by surprise. Perhaps the two apostles on their trek to Emmaus were so busy expecting to find Jesus in the heavenly equivalent of red and white stripes that they couldn't recognize that the traveler quietly and meekly had joined their party, and that's who it was. He may have continued on along the road once they reached Emmaus, but they urged him to join them. They extended hospitality to the stranger who somehow understood all the prophets and was able to give light to the scriptures that had told about Jesus, even though he had claimed to be previously unfamiliar with the topic of discussion as he joined their party. He was asked to stay with them. And it was then, after the hospitality was extended, that they were finally able to see him for who he was. It was at that table when Jesus took the bread, blessed it, and broke it. And as he shared it with them, they saw it was Jesus. Their eyes were open. They could recognize the very man they were mourning. And as that light of recognition flickered in their eyes, it just vanished. They realized, as they talked about the amazing thing that had just taken place, that they had known somewhere deep in the pit of their stomachs that it was him all along, but they couldn't name that feeling or place or what it was, as their hearts were burning within them while they conversed with him on the road. As Jesus was making the scriptures more clear, they knew he was there deep within, but it just didn't look the way that they expected it to. And it wasn't until they had extended that hospitality to the stranger, asking him to stay with them, and doing an act that Jesus himself would have done. And then in Jesus doing what he did so frequently, breaking the bread and sharing it with those at the table, that Jesus was revealed. They broke out of these bindings of their grief and mourning and wriggled free from the expectation of what should have happened and the disappointment of what they had hoped for not coming to pass, and shifted to this autopilot of following what Jesus would have had them do, which is inviting a stranger to join you. They were able to see the whole scene, the full, busy landscape of the end of that third day after Jesus' death. They had confirmation, and once they had rushed back to Jerusalem, so a whole other 7 miles to be with the others, this confirmation that yes, Jesus had just appeared to Simon as well. We too are in a different state from our usual this Easter season. We are perhaps grieving the things that had not turned out as we had meticulously planned them. I'm actually delivering this sermon to you from Camp Quarantine. See that little tent there? A makeshift celebration of my son Carrie's 13th birthday. So we called it Camp Quarantine with TEEN at the end of that. Because this would have otherwise been a big camp out that we would have done at the beach with all of our extended family. And we've done this every year, but this year we've moved it to the backyard. We're dealing with a case of what we had hoped for versus what we were dealt due to sheltering in place, and the fear of getting our very large, extended, super blended family together during this time and potentially getting one another sick. I'm sure that you've had some plans change too during this time. something big maybe has been canceled during the season, or just the usual routine, the getting up on Sunday morning and coming to church and seeing the people you love. There's been a lot of disruption and a lot of change to what we had expected would be coming to us this spring. So I want to leave with you 2 thoughts to take into this week with you. First, even though it's really tempting to Where's Waldo your situation and look for the glimmers of familiarity, try not to, and instead take in this bigger picture of what's going on, focusing on the one thing you can't find right now, the hope that seems to be mercilessly dashed against the cruel shores of COVID-19, and that reality. Holding on to that may be preventing you from taking in the beautiful, life-filled world around you. And secondly, keep in mind that Jesus does show up for you and will keep showing up. It may not be for as long as you want. I'm sure that the apostles, after the bread had been broken, they would have wanted to have him there for that entire meal, that entire night, to say, whoa, what is going on here? But it was just a glimmer. Jesus was there for however long that they needed him. I mean, it was to provide that hope. So it may not be for as long as you want, but Jesus will appear in that moment when you really need him. If you feel that burning in your heart and that soaring in your soul, look wider. Open your understanding broader to accommodate new and unexpected encounters that are out of the ordinary and away from what you had placed your hopes in for this season. The resurrection is not limited to our previous understanding of it. And all Jesus is asking of us is to provide the space and invitation, and he will make himself known, even in our grief. No red striped shirt and beanie cap necessary.